Hello there, welcome to another Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz the Jadala.
And for our penultimate chat of 2023, Chaz, we're going to start with a look at yesterday's fourth Republican primary debate, this time with just four candidates on the stage. The former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, the former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, the current Governor of the state of Florida Ron DeSantis, and the Vivek Ramaswamy, who is like, I don't know, tech entrepreneur, I think he calls him. I don't know what he is. He's a pain in the neck. Anyway, joining us to go through that debate is friend of the show, Ford O'Connell. He's a long-time Republican political strategist. He worked on campaigns including McCain-Palin in 2008. He was a surrogate for Trump-Pence in 2020. Ford O'Connell, so good to see you again. Welcome back.
Always good to be with you guys.
What were your hot takes? What were your overall impressions of yesterday's debate, Ford?
Well, sparks flew, insults were hurled. It was a fiery debate. Here in the States, they're calling it the tussle in Tuscaloosa. But to be totally honest with you, I don't know what the Republican primary voter gained out of it because it really became a free-for-all.
If we look at what rather than talk about winning and losing, because one of the candidates is 45 points ahead, so let's not be silly here. If we look at what the actual candidates were trying to achieve versus what they actually did achieve, if we start with, say, Ron DeSantis, for instance. Now, he's been slipping in the polls recently. Nikki Haley's been getting the big donors. If before now, I would have said I wasn't sure if Haley or DeSantis was winning, but after this debate, when Ron DeSantis seemed to be laser focused on taking Haley down, I think it's almost a concession in a way that he's not ahead. I'll just show you a clip of what I'm talking about. The first question of the night, very first question of the night, Ron DeSantis pretty much ignored it. 20 seconds later, he's attacking Nikki Haley. This is how it went.
Is it fair to say, as Senator Tim Scott did when he dropped out, that voters are telling you, not no, but not now?
I have delivered results. That's what we need for this country. And you have other candidates up here like Nikki Haley. She caves anytime the left comes after her, anytime the media comes after her. I did a bill in Florida to stop the gender mutilation of minors. It's child abuse and it's wrong. She opposes that bill. She thinks it's fine and the law shouldn't get involved with it. If you're not willing to stand up for the kids, if you're not willing to stand up and say that it is wrong to mutilate these kids, then you're not going to fight for the people back home.
Nikki Haley isn't standing for the kids, Ford. Did DeSantis successfully take her down?
Well, look, in the battle for a way distant second, there is no question about it that Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are head-to-head. But when we look at the polls of Republican primary voters, what we find out is Nikki Haley is the least defined candidate among the participants in that debate. And what Ron DeSantis was trying to do is basically say, look, she's not an America First candidate in the Trump mold. What she is, she's more like Mitt Romney in heels or George W. Bush and the Republican Party. If you don't know who Nikki Haley is, I'm going to tell you right now. And I mean, there's no question that they are battling for a distant second place. And Haley certainly has some momentum. But, you know, look, we are about 6 weeks from Iowa, and Ron DeSantis has put his entire efforts on winning Iowa. And the reason why they brought up gender mutilation of children is because Iowa is much more evangelical. And Ron DeSantis is basically saying, if I don't win Iowa, my campaign's going to be over.
And then, of course, Ford, we saw the attacks coming from the other side, from Vivek Ramaswamy, who was accusing her of, in as many words, being corrupt, saying that she, after she left the Trump administration as United Nations ambassador, she took a board position at Boeing. Therefore, she's basically a neocon looking to start wars to profit Boeing, who she no longer works for. I mean, the logic of it was a little bit strained, but the allegation, one Republican calling another corrupt on a debate stage. Take a look at this.
Larry Fink, the king of the woke industrial complex, the ESG movement, the CEO of BlackRock, the most powerful company in the world, now supporting Nikki Haley. And to say that doesn't affect her is false, because it's after that meeting later that day that she says that every American needs to be doxxed by having their ID, their government-issued ID, tied to what they say on the internet. So I think that this is far more corrupt than I even imagined.
And I love all the attention, fellas. Thank you for that.
Now, Ford, Nikki Haley said that she loved all the attention, but I'm not sure about you. It didn't seem to me as though she did particularly love all the attention. Her strategy seems to have been quite different. In the last debate, she was referring to Vivek as scum. This time, she was maybe trying to be presidential, or maybe she was just kind of a little bit startled by the full-on assault. How did you read all that?
Well, the knives were out for Nikki Haley. And again, she is the least defined of the participants in that debate. And they're trying to help the Republican primary electorate say, hey, she's a China-loving neocon. And, she's going to be weak on the border. She is not who she's been selling herself as. So as the media says she's on this ascendant rise, let us tell you that she is not everything she says she is. And I mean, that is going to, we're not going to know for a week or two whether or not these attacks worked. The question is what other media stories are going to accompany many of the allegations that folks made on the stage? Because I will tell you, those sort of lobs that they try to slime her with are things that will not sell with the Republican primary voters.
If we look at it from Haley's point of view, rather than what they were trying to do to her, looking at it from her attempt to defend herself, like John said, I agree with him that she was trying to be presidential, trying to rise above it all, trying to act like the front runner, well, the relative front runner of that debate. I think it was probably epitomised by one particular moment when Vivek went into overdrive with his attacks and literally pulled out a pad with an accusation on it, and then Nikki Haley refused to respond. I'll just play it to you.
At the first debate, she said that only a woman can get this job done. That's what she said. After the third debate, when I criticized Ronna McDaniel after 5 failed years of leadership of this party and criticized Nikki for her corrupt foreign dealings as a military contractor, she said that I have a woman problem. Nikki, I don't have a woman problem. You have a corruption problem. And I think that that's what people need to know. Nikki is corrupt. This is a woman who will send your kids to die so she can buy a bigger house. This is the problem. Using identity politics more effectively than Kamala Harris is a form of intellectual fraud. And it actually needs to end. There's our donor puppet masters wielding their puppet right up here tonight. And I'm sick and tired of the double standards. The people of this country are too. Having 2 X chromosomes does not immunize you from criticism.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Governor Haley, would you like to respond?
No. It's not worth my time to respond to him.
Okay, so she didn't respond at all. All night, people were talking over her, and she did not talk back over them. And she's shown in the previous debates that she could do that if she wants to. She chose not to. She was trying to act refined and above it all. Did she come off as presidential, or did she come off as weak?
Well, I think one of the issues here is that Vivek Ramaswamy was trying to make some very interesting points. I think he went a little bit too far by challenging her womanhood. But when we look at a general election, Chaz, what you got to realize is the Democrats have 2 playbooks. And their 2 plays are going to say Republicans are racist and Republicans are sexist. And they're going to hope that that's going to help Joe Biden overcome the inflation problem that's gripping America right now. If you can't take the barbs from Vivek Ramaswamy right now, good luck when the American media complex and Joe Biden come after you. So this is trial by fire. She's learning. I think this was her weakest debate. This was the 4th debate. It was her weakest debate. She was much stronger in the other 3. But again, we're going to see, what these candidates can do under fire. And frankly, it's better to take fire from your own right now than it is in the general election.
Yeah. Chris Christie, of course, in this 4th debate, he only just made it forward, and it's doubtful that he's going to make the next one before the Iowa caucuses. We'll see on that. But he's clearly back to, whereas in the last debate he was kind of almost trying to look as though he was a real presidential candidate, he was back to full-on attack against Donald Trump this time. But yesterday he was also trying to goad Ron DeSantis in particular to be more critical of Donald Trump, to be the kind of candidate he thinks that DeSantis needs to be in order to beat Donald Trump. Take a look at this.
Chance to wax eloquent on Donald Trump. You've been doing it all this whole race.
Why doesn't he just answer the question? The question was very direct. Is he fit to be president or isn't he? The rest of the speech is interesting, but completely non-responsive. And if we were in a courtroom, they'd strike the answer and say, Governor DeSantis.
No, they wouldn't. They would say that
you're a smart
would
man.
argue that
No, they would.
No, they wouldn't.
They would
Chris.
strike the answer
no, they wouldn't.
because you're not answering
you
it.
Just
is he
don't
fit?
like. You
is
have
he
your.
fit?
You have
no.
your thing.
Is he fit
you
or isn't he?
thing.
No, I don't have my thing.
We don't.
He's the thing. Is
we
he fit
not
or
want
isn't
to
he?
do someone
You're talking
that's
about him being 80 years old.
It doesn't mean
Ron,
that somebody
is he
couldn't
fit?
get elected. That's
Ron,
up to the people.
Governor DeSantis, let
Ron, is he
him
fit or isn't he?
Governor DeSantis, let him finish.
Ron, is he
I think we have an opportunity to do somebody who is in the prime of their life.
Yes.
We don't have to worry about all this stuff with confidence. We can get it done, and we'll do it.
So Ford, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, his former national security advisor, A lot of people who have worked very closely with Donald Trump say he is unfit to be president. Ron DeSantis wants to be president instead of Donald Trump, and he won't say it. Why?
Very simple, because 6 in 10 Republican primary voters back Donald Trump. And if you're going to be the Republican nominee over Donald Trump, you have to win a large chunk of those voters. But let me just go to raw American politics for a second. You guys tell me one Democrat who's ever said Joe Biden is too old or he's cognitively impaired. They won't say it. And the reason why they won't say it is because if you do say it, it will be used in an attack against you. This is the problem with the American two-party system. It is no longer about who the better candidate is. It's who can I convince you is worse. And that is really what has happened in the internet, cable news era of American politics. And unfortunately, I'm a big fan of the two-party system because I've seen what happens in parliamentary government. But at the same time, I think voters are getting shortchanged.
That moment we just played you between Chris Christie and Ron DeSantis was obviously very reminiscent of a moment 8 years ago when Chris Christie was haranguing Marco Rubio in the debate over and over again in a similar kind of way. Just like Marco Rubio, Ron DeSantis repeated the same catchphrase a couple of times. This time, Chris Christie didn't go in for the kill. He didn't actually point out that Ron DeSantis was like a robot, a malfunctioning robot, repeating the phrase over and over again. But he did harangue him in a similar way. This time, 8 years later, Chris Christie is far less popular, and they're talking about an issue which he is on the losing side of in the Republican Party, as you point out. So do you think Ron DeSantis loses any paint the way that Marco Rubio did?
No, I actually don't. I don't. But at the same time, Marco Rubio was never down 40, 45 points to Donald Trump. He basically just didn't go on. You have to remember that Chris Christie is in here not to win the Republican presidential nomination because he's about as popular in the Republican Party as Ebola is. But at the same time, you have to realize his donors don't want him to destroy Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, because then that would defeat the entire purpose of his existence in that campaign. But what I thought was crazy during that sort of exchange that they did have is Chris Christie was yelling at Vivek Ramaswamy for attacking Nikki Haley, but the entire impetus of Chris Christie's campaign is to attack Donald Trump. And my question to you is, does that make him a hypocrite?
Yeah, it's interesting, as was Chris Christie's decision as well to try and stand up for Nikki Haley against Vivek Ramaswamy. Some people saw that as him being gracious, and others saw it as him mansplaining. But there was no doubt about it when given the opportunity, Chris Christie let Vivek Ramaswamy have it. Ramaswamy being, I guess, the closest thing on that stage to Donald Trump, in that when he's not sort of parroting kind of, I don't know, Ron Paul-like kind of crazy ideas, he's the most defensive of former President Trump. But have a look at this from Chris Christie and then Vivek Ramaswamy, and you say what you like about him, the guy can slap back very, very hard, and he basically told Chris Christie to go and eat something and get off the stage.
This is the fourth debate that you would be voted in the first 20 minutes as the most obnoxious blowhard in America. So shut up for a little while.
I'm going to respond to that. Your version of... No, I want to say...
I'll take that. I want to say something else. We're now 25 minutes into this debate, and he has insulted Nikki Haley's basic intelligence, not her positions, her basic intelligence. She doesn't know regions. She wouldn't be able to find something on a map that his 3-year-old could find. Look, if you want to disagree on issues, that's fine. And Nikki and I disagree on some issues. But I'll tell you this, I've known her for 12 years, which is longer than he's even started to vote in a Republican primary. And while we disagree about some issues and we disagree about who should be president of the United States, what we don't disagree on is this is a smart, accomplished woman, and you should stop insulting her.
So I'm going to take several times over. Chris, your version of foreign policy experience was closing a bridge from New Jersey to New York.
Yeah.
So do everybody a favor, just walk yourself off that stage, enjoy a nice meal, and get the hell out of this race. When it comes to Nikki...
All very entertaining stuff, Ford O'Connell. Do you think that is the last we will see of both Christie and Ramaswamy in these debates? And if so, particularly for Chris Christie, should he be looking very seriously in the new year to getting out of this race and potentially handing 9 or 10 points in New Hampshire to Nikki Haley?
Well, I think that Chris Christie's political career is over. I mean, when it comes to Vivek Ramaswamy, he's a rabble-rouser. He does have a bright political future in America because he's so young, and he's going to learn from some of his mistakes. And if that doesn't work, he's going to wind up becoming a TV commentator. The sky's the limit for him in terms of raw talent. The only question is, how does he harness it going forward?
Ford O'Connell, always great to get your analysis. Good to see you again. Take care. Great
to be with you, gentlemen.
Well, Chad, so much for the tussle in Tuscaloosa. What about the tussle on Capitol Hill in Washington? Hopes of a big aid package covering Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and a bit of border security tossed in for good measure in the hope that there'll be something for everybody to want to vote for and not against. That really ran into not really a speed hump, more of a roadblock, I want to say, this week.
Yeah, brick wall, I would say. It's essentially the problem is not the Israel part of the funding or the Taiwan part of the funding. It's essentially, there's a bit of a trade-off happening between Ukraine funding and immigration reform. The Republicans are not going to give Ukraine funding without immigration reform. The Democrats are willing to negotiate. They're trying to negotiate. So far, there's a bit of a problem. And essentially, this standoff has been going for months now. But this week, the White House actually put out a statement saying, I want to be clear, without congressional action by the end of the year, we will run out of resources to procure more weapons and equipment for Ukraine and to provide equipment from US military stocks. There's no magical pot of funding available to meet this moment. We are out of money and nearly out of time. So that's days away at this point in time. So it's quite serious. This is a war where reportedly 500,000 people have died, and Ukraine may not last without funding from America, may or may not, right? Okay, so, and this is a big deal for Biden as well, because Ukraine is the issue he's most popular on. According to Quinnipiac, he's actually positive in that. He has more positive reaction from people than negative reaction, whereas immigration is the thing he's most negative on. He's 37 points underwater, 37 points more negative than positive. So he really, really needs to not have a situation where Democrats go, we're going to destroy the thing that people approve of with Biden in order to save the thing that they disapprove of. But the Republicans know that, and that's why Republicans are saying things like John Cornyn, for instance, one of the negotiators in the Senate, is saying, I think there's a misunderstanding on the part of Senator Schumer and some of our Democratic friends. This is not a traditional negotiation where we expect to come up with a bipartisan compromise on the border. This is a price that has to be paid in order to get the supplemental. The Republicans saying no negotiating. And the Democrats are trying to bend over, but they're being pushed pretty far. And this week, Chris Murphy gave up. He's the Democrats' negotiator. He says, we are going to abandon Ukraine, essentially. And so this is a big deal. Yeah, and there are two ways of reading that. That could be a rare moment of honesty and insight from Chris Murphy saying, yep, this has all gone horribly wrong, it's not going to happen. Or it is a way of, it's a five-alarm fire saying this is very, very serious. There are enough Republican votes in the Senate to pass this thing, but they're aware of, we can pass it here, but it's not passing the House. The House is going to require an awful lot of border security. They're very, very lukewarm on Ukraine spending. So to get even a bipartisan coalition in the House needs, well, the House Speaker to say there is enough in this on border security for us to bring it to a vote in the House. So it has to satisfy both. So there's still a slender majority of Democrats in the Senate and a bunch of Republican votes probably at the end of the day, but the House is the other big question. So whether they then have to throw more things into this sort of supplemental omnibus, let's get it done before we go away for Christmas because otherwise we lose a war with Putin while we're having our turkey and Christmas crackers, or do they pull it apart again and say, okay, here's a stopgap way of funding Ukraine. I mean, the point is the money doesn't stop for Ukraine on the 1st of January. The money might stop, but there is still supplies in the pipeline that will continue for some period of time. But it would be a heck of a blow to Ukraine. The supplies have been going on for some time. I think the supplies stop towards the end of the year. And I was just going to say, Mike Johnson has explicitly said, if we don't get the immigration reform that we want, this bill is not getting up. Like he's He's drawn a red line, and you make the perfect point. The negotiations I'm talking about are just in the Senate. If they get past the Senate Republicans, then the House Republicans actually have more requests about immigration funding.
Yeah, and while all that's happening, you talk about herding cats or playing whack-a-mole, for Democrats right now, funding for Israel is becoming a lot less popular than it was on the 8th of October. So trying to sort of meld all of this into something that a majority in both houses are going to approve of, and it's going to procedurally even get to the point of them being able to have an up or down vote. That is where it's going to become critically important. This does feel very much like a little bit like a debt ceiling kind of a standoff. This is one of those standoffs where all will appear lost until the last minute when either they go off the cliff or they do get a deal put together, and I just don't know what's going to happen at this point.
This is also what they're doing when they should be passing the budget as well, because that standoff is coming as well.
Sure. They'll probably pile that all into the supplemental, I'm sure. There was some progress, though. The Republican Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, whose main qualification for being in the Senate is having been a college football coach, he had this basically a block on all military promotions that had to be confirmed by the Senate from going through, because he was unhappy that there was money in the defence budget to pay for service members who needed to travel to get an abortion in a different state. So if you're a pregnant service member and you're stationed in a state that has now made it illegal to get an abortion, there was, healthcare funding to say, well, we can send you to California where you can get an abortion. But he was saying, no, we're not going to do that. And until you get this out of the bill, we're not going to have any of those promotions go through.
It was just transport and accommodation funding. It wasn't for the actual abortion, but they didn't want to have any funding for anything to do with abortion.
So he's kind of caved this week.
Yeah, basically for the last 3 months, Chuck Schumer's been trying to get the numbers amongst Republicans. They need 9 Republicans to overcome the filibuster, to change the rules in the Senate to make Tuberville's hold irrelevant. And they finally got their 9th person this week. And so then Tuberville said, well, I give up. And so he had a hold at this point in time on 451 promotions. And he said that he was going to release the hold on all the generals, on all the officers below 3-star, 3-star or below. So that was I think 440 of them. So, and Chuck Schumer immediately passed them as soon as he could. So now there's a hold on 11, which is okay. You can deal with them one at a time. The problem was they couldn't deal with 451.
It would have taken them a couple of years to go through all of those sort of individual confirmations. So that was interesting. Kevin McCarthy, not surprisingly, the former House Speaker, announced this week that he's not even waiting until next year's elections. He's quitting now and at the end of the year. So he will not be coming back after a couple of weeks.
And let's be clear about this. That is an act of bastardry because they need every single Republican they can get in the Congress to pass anything at the moment. And that means that their margins just reduced by 1 more again. And they really, like we just said, they really need the numbers right now. And it's not like Kevin McCarthy isn't aware of that.
He knows numbers pretty well.
He does. And there's going to be now an absence until there's a by-election, the equivalent.
Special election in California.
And guess who decides when that's going to be? It's Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat. And once again, Kevin McCarthy is aware of that.
And this obviously is more important because, as we reported earlier in the week, we had the expulsion of Republican George Santos from New York because of all the stuff that he has done and not done and said that he did and all that kind of thing. Very interesting so we're effectively going to see the slim majority that the Republicans have in the House reduced by 2 in the new year. So those votes on government funding will be with a further diminished House, a House with which will then be 433 rather than 435 members. There was a push from George Santos as he was going out the door to have a Democrat kicked out. They wanted to have Jamal Bowman expelled. Now, this is one of my favourite stories. Jamal Bowman, a Democrat from New York. This is back on basically the day that cost Kevin McCarthy his job. At the very end of September, when McCarthy was trying to put together a short-term funding bill to keep the government from closing down, he presented this bill to the Democrats, but then rushed to go to a vote before the Democrats had even gone through all the pages to see was there any sort of poison pills or nasties in here that they couldn't possibly support. So Jamal Bowman, well, He says he accidentally pushed the fire alarm when he was trying to go through some doors that had been locked that weren't usually locked because it was a weekend session. And he then admitted that he'd done this, but said it was a mistake, yada, yada. Anyway, there was a censure motion this week, short of an expulsion, but still not good, not that common. And this was the excuse that Jamal gave. See whether you believe him.
I was rushing to the Capitol to vote and prevent a Republican shutdown. When I tried to exit a door that I usually go through, it didn't open, and due to confusion and rush to go vote, I pulled the fire alarm. I immediately took responsibility and accountability for my actions and pled guilty. Immediately.
Immediately, Chaz.
Yeah, just something on that. When he says immediately, he doesn't mean when the fire alarm went off.
No.
He means afterwards.
After the 1 hour evacuation, where a bunch of Democrats were going, yep, that looks all right.
Yeah.
Yep, I think we can vote for this.
He means after a photo of him came out on the internet and everyone knew it was him. That's when he took responsibility. So that's the first thing. The second thing is his line that he was just trying to get out. That's all. He was just trying to get out, and there was confusion. And something. Okay, all right. Why don't we look at the video, shall we? Because the video's now been released. What you can see is him going up. He takes a sign off the door.
Yep.
And he hits the alarm and he just leaves without even trying to go out the door.
Right. So if he thought that was a door release button, then, well, he was deterred very, very quickly from going through those doors.
Yeah, well, exactly. He never tried, once he hit the inverted commas door release button, to try to go through the door. And as for him in the big rush to get to a vote, he's sauntering.
Yeah.
He's not in a rush.
Yeah.
So I don't believe him.
No, not a lot of people did believe him, and confronted with that evidence immediately, Bowman paid a $1,000 fine to the Capitol Police. But it did buy Democrats time to go through the bill, and they passed it, sealing the fate of Kevin McCarthy, keeping the government open. The censure was interesting, though, because Jamal Bowman still, his excuse doesn't seem like he's telling the truth. He was censured. But a number of fellow Democrats, a number of them from the squad, were around him, sort of shouting "shame, shame, shame" as the censure motion passed, to imply that this was a racially motivated censure, that they were doing this because he was a member of a minority group. And I'm not sure what I think about that, but it was an odd end to the week in Congress, that's for sure.
No. First of all, pretty obviously tit for tat, I would have thought. Partisan tit for tat. Secondly, the nature of America, where the Republican Party is almost entirely white and the Democratic Party is very multiracial, the odds are, if you're going to criticise a Democrat, they're not going to be white, because most of them aren't white.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's a bit ridiculous. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have censured him, but look at the video. He clearly did it.
He admitted he did it. He just didn't admit why he did it. Now, there's been a lot of commentary this week about Donald Trump's apparent admission that he'd be a dictator, at least for one day, if re-elected. Now, given that he did try to hold on to power in 2021 after clearly losing the election to Joe Biden, and he has repeatedly praised dictators like Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, it's not a crazy concern that Trump could become an autocrat or a dictator. But is this being overblown this week? The latest dictator talk really began with these comments last Sunday by former Republican Congresswoman turned author Liz Cheney.
He's told us what he will do. People who say, well, if he's elected, it's not that dangerous because we have all of these checks and balances. One of the things that we see happening today is a sort of a sleepwalking into dictatorship in the United States.
Sleepwalking into dictatorship led to a lot of people talking about the dictatorial tendencies of Donald Trump. Trump was then on a Fox News town hall with Sean Hannity on Wednesday night, and he was asked about those concerns by Sean Hannity, who was clearly teeing it up for him to just go, oh, no. But, well, Trump didn't play along.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be, he keeps, We love this guy. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, 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 other than day one. We're closing the border, and we're drilling, drilling, drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
And here's a taste of some of the reaction from the left.
Stunning comments about a potential second term.
Think about it. If any other politician in American history were asked the question, are you going to be a dictator? No.
And here's a taste of the reaction on the right to the reaction on the left.
He was joking about those dictator comments. What he did there is brilliant. He made it into a joke.
So, Chaz, was it all a joke, or should we believe Donald Trump when he says that he is going to be a dictator? He wasn't saying he was going to be a dictator locking up his enemies, which he's effectively said in the past, when he said that he was going to set the Justice Department onto Biden and his family, just as he reckons Biden has set it on him. He's talking about drilling for oil and closing the borders, which is not really dictatorial powers.
Yeah, just for the record, both those things are within the executive's power.
Right.
Regulations on oil drilling and the border, they're both in the executive's
And when they
power.
talk about day one, typically this is something you hear all the time on the campaign trail. On day one, I'm going to do this thing. When they say that, they're by definition saying, I'm going to issue an executive order to do something.
Look, he clearly was joking. Like, honestly, like, this kind of sort of breaks my heart a little bit, because there is a concern out there about what Donald Trump will do in his second term. And what that concern is based on is what he did in his first term. Like, I don't want to distract during this conversation with going through the past, but there are all kinds of things he did that were authoritarian in nature. Sure. And it's very easy to say, well, he might go further this time. But that's different to just jumping at shadows, and every single time he makes a joke or whatever, it's just saying, oh, look, he's going to be a dictator. I feel like the more heightened your rhetoric, the more you need to base it on fact. Because the problem with this is that the more the Democrats jump up and down about dictator in the media and so forth, it makes the real stuff seem like rhetoric.
Yep.
It makes if someone gets up there and says, well, this is what he did during his first term, people go, oh, you're just scaremongering. Because everyone's trying to dictators at the moment. And I also don't like, if you're going to do this, you need to bound it in facts, because there are crazies out there who react to this kind of stuff. And so you need to make sure you are very, very careful. And this story is not careful at all. It's sloppy. I'm not talking about Liz Cheney. She's careful. But this story was very, very sloppy. He wasn't confessing to be a dictator. He was messing around. Why don't you focus on the actual concerns involving Trump rather than what he says to Sean Hannity when he's stuffing around?
We have seen it time and time again since 2015 that Trump says things that are deliberately outrageous and provocative that possibly have a very, very serious and worrying subtext. But when the reaction that he provokes is an overreaction, overreaches on what he actually said, and so the headlines become, Trump says he'll be a dictator. Well, that's not what he was saying, not really. Then it discredits the people who are overreacting. And as you say, it's the boy who cried wolf. Nobody listens to them when they say, look, he's politicised the judiciary. Look what he is doing here in this area, this area, this area. So, no, you said he was going to be holding Nuremberg rallies in Washington on Inauguration Day. Hasn't happened.
Yeah, just focus on what he's done. He's done plenty.
Yeah. We've got some more for you now from our interview that we conducted earlier with Democrat strategist and pollster Celinda Lake. She's worked closely with Joe Biden for years and years. We wanted to know what she makes of Biden's pretty ordinary polling position. Less than 1 year out from the election now, Biden is losing support in some very key groups, younger voters, minority voters as well. He's trailing Donald Trump in crucial swing states and in the average of national polls. And those polls also reveal that voters are really concerned about one thing, that Joe Biden cannot change his age, 81, as well as the impact that they are still feeling of a couple of years of inflation and the overall state of the economy. Here's Celinda Lake.
Number one, get wages up. Number two, pick some fights and get the price gouging down, like the president did on oil and gas prices, like he's done on eggs, like he's done on prescription drugs. I mean, insulin is demonstrably costing less than it did before Joe Biden was president. So pick some fights. And then ultimately, as Joe Biden himself says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to my alternative. And when this becomes a contrast, when it becomes a choice, I think Joe Biden will come out way ahead.
So, Celinda, maybe in the next 6 months the economy improves and Joe Biden starts to get some more credit for that, but The other big concern, of course, about Joe Biden is his age, and in 6 months, he is going to be even older than he is today. Would he be polling better now if he was 61 or 71 rather than 81?
Well, remember, Donald Trump is only 2 years younger than he is. So everyone's going to get older. You and me too, although we're going to stop time. But everyone's going to get older. I think the real concern is, and I think what will be remedied, age is really a surrogate for strength, for competence, for getting things done. And I think as the record gets out, as Joe Biden gets on the campaign trail more, as he engages in fights, frankly, as he engages against Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is very energizing for Joe Biden, I think you're going to see that those age numbers come down. You're going to see fighting Joe, and that's going to be a Joe that looks young and energetic to voters, or at least younger.
Okay, so let me take John's age questions and let me turn them on their head. Because we've been talking about the demographic groups that Joe Biden is losing, but how about the ones that he's gaining? Like, for instance, this sounds like a joke, I know, but Joe Biden appears to be doing really well amongst super old people. Really, like genuinely he
That's
is.
Right.
So is that a real thing?
That's right. That's a real thing. And at first I was really surprised at it because it used to be his toughest group, but now it's his best group. And there are three things that really factor into that. They tend to be paying more attention, so they know his record. They really agree with him on Israel and Palestine. They really value the foreign policy experience. And, a lot of younger voters can't find Taiwan on a map. A lot of older voters are afraid first Ukraine, then Israel, then Taiwan. So they're just a general view of the world. And then I think that older voters are also really appalled by Donald Trump's style and character. The idea of calling your opponents vermin, just the kind of bombastic style he has, is a real turnoff, particularly to older women.
It's just something I've noticed, that the more people seem to see either Biden or Trump, the less they seem to like them. Right now, people are seeing a lot of Biden, not so much of Trump. But maybe in 6 months' time, they'll be seeing a lot more of Trump during his trials. And if I was Joe Biden, I would be disappearing then. Do you think that that could possibly become a factor in the election?
It's a real factor, and it's a very astute observation, because right now, these trials are having a really weird effect. On the one hand, they're very visible to his base, and they buy this idea, I got indicted for you, which is total BS. And on the other hand, real voters aren't seeing him, and they're glad they're not. So it's a very big factor. And yet you have Joe Biden out there out front on a mixed economy and a very precarious international situation. So you're absolutely right. And the other thing is, we know that whichever party has a primary, independent of the party, is always more energized at this point in time. We don't have a meaningful primary. They do. And even though I'm sure Donald Trump will be the nominee, they're more energized than we are. We're Democrats. We're being mopey-popey now. But there's nothing as energizing for Democrats as Donald Trump. The other thing that's really unique about this election, even today, 56% of the voters say their vote is going to be about Donald Trump. Usually a vote is about an incumbent, is a referendum on that incumbent. If we make it a choice, as the president did in 2022, we're going to win that choice.
Last week we told you about a program called Quiet Skies. Sonia Labosco, the director of the Air Marshals National Council, told us that under the program, air marshals were surveilling people on flights who had previously flown into the Washington area around January the 6th. And they might continue to do so for 7 to 15 years, according to Sonia. Now, I promised we'd keep looking into this story, but the best you can get online are quotes like this from the Congressional Research Service. Individuals may be placed on these lists based on their recent international travel patterns and are subject to enhanced screening measures, including additional baggage screening for a period of time. That's not saying much. Look, we tried for 2 weeks to get someone from the government to talk to us about this. No luck. But we did get in touch with an expert on terrorism and homeland security who's previously written about the Quiet Skies program. He's a professor emeritus of the Mershon Center for International Security Studies at Ohio State University. His name is Professor John Mueller. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, Professor, in your view, what does the Quiet Skies program do?
It seems to be an effort to try to get the air marshals to have something to do, to try to spy out people that look suspicious on the airline, an issue which is probably of almost no magnitude whatever. I mean, the Transportation Security Administration has a huge budget, like $1 billion, for the air marshals alone. They fly on very few planes, even maybe less than 5% in the United States, and they've never caught anybody, though they may have helped with the occasional drunk or something like that. It's basically an incredible waste.
So are you saying that the Quiet Skies program, regardless of before or after 2021, has never been effective and has never been worth it?
Yeah, there's just so many ways to deter terrorists from trying to take down an airplane that the marginal advantage of these kinds of things. There's also, for example, there's the behavioral detection officers, which I think was finally dropped, in which there are people roaming the airports looking for people who look suspicious. And they basically never found anybody. They've never arrested anybody. And of course, there's been very little terrorism involving airplanes anyway. There's only two efforts to take bombs on. One, the shoe bomber in 2002, and the other, the underwear bomber, about 8 years later. Both of them were succumbed to the passenger resistance, and their bombs probably wouldn't have been big enough, even if they detonated them, to bring down the airplane. The basic issue is, if you got a layer of protection, like this Quiet Skies thing, how much does it cost? And does it reduce the risk enough to justify its cost? And as far as I can see, they've never done that with anything.
From the civil liberties point of view, though, is it true to say that since 2021, the Quiet Skies program has been entirely about following people around who flew into the Washington region around January 6, 2021? It hasn't been used for anything else.
As far as I know, that's what it's done, but they keep their lists for 5 years or something like that. And so you can imagine other people being pestered. Essentially, they've come up with nothing, nor were anybody before that in any of the programs. They're basically, terrorists are simply not on airplanes.
So are you saying that, in your view, we shouldn't have air marshals at all, full stop?
Pretty much, yeah. They're a waste of money. We've calculated basically that for every dollar you spend on the air marshal, you increase security by about 10 cents, something like that. Simply an incredible waste of money. Well, hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Well, I'm glad Sonia isn't here to hear that. Finally, to wrap up, John, are you most concerned about air marshals and the Quiet Skies program from a civil liberties point of view, or from a waste of resources point of view, or from it doesn't help security point of view, or is it just all combined?
Yeah, it's all combined. There is a surveillance issue, the privacy issue and so forth. But if you're spending a lot of money invading people's privacy and you demonstrate that you're able to save lots of lives, then that's one thing. But there's no demonstration they saved any lives. The air marshals are not terribly impressive. There's an incredible turnover in air marshals every year because it's such a boring job. You have to fly around all the time. You can't sleep, obviously. You can't have things in your ears. Maybe you can read or something, but you can't drink, which would be a big salvation. And the scheduling tends to be very screwed up, so they're constantly sleep deprived, apparently, and so they're dropping out over very quickly. But since they don't do anything, it doesn't really matter, I suppose. They have no consequence overall. And again, they fly, even if they did have some effect, they fly in a very small number of airplanes. A terrorist picking a plane at random is probably 95% chance that there won't be an air marshal on that plane. And if you try to have one on every plane, of course, the cost becomes spectacularly prohibitive.
John Mueller, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be here.
And that's all for another Fireside Chat. We will see you for our final Planet America of 2023 next Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV.
Both Wednesday and Friday shows are on ABC, iView, Facebook and YouTube whenever you like, and you'll find the Pet Podcast and all the very finest pod places right there.
Bye-bye.